Most pirates didn't have the luxury of choosing their own ship. They had to make do with whatever was available, be it a captured sloop or a small piragua. They modified these crafts to the best of their abilities, adding firepower, protection, and removing unnecessary sections to improve speed. Many pirates changed ships at several points in their careers, as they always acquired vessels that were slightly superior in one way or another, or simply advantageous to their current situation. But what if a pirate had the ability to choose? What if he had been able to build his own pirate ship, from the ground up? What qualities would he look for? The primary goal of a pirate ship was to capture merchant ships. These are often poorly armed and crewed, and will run away from a fight. The pirate has to catch her. If push comes to shove, the pirate ship needs to defeat its opponent in combat, and needs enough firepower to defeat merchants at sea, but not so many cannons as to slow her down. If the pirate ship is pursued by a superior enemy, she needs the ability to escape. The subject of this video was constructed by a rover himself. She was called the Adventure. Full rigged, she could sail at the fastest speeds possible for a ship of the time, allowing her to cross vast distances rapidly and chase down any target. If the winds were poor, her crew pulled out the sweeps and closed the distance by rowing. Well within reach, her 34 guns could easily beat any merchant that dared to resist. The Adventure Galley was the perfect pirate ship, on paper. Only 3 years after her construction, she sank, by the hand of her own captain. So what happened? Why would a pirate choose to burn down a legendary pirate ship like the Adventure Galley? The Adventure Galley was a type of ship commonly called galley, but not the same as the galleys seen in the Baltic and Mediterranean. They are also called galley frigates because they were essentially just frigates with oars added to them, allowing them to escape and pursue in calm winds. Frigates were first developed by the Dutch in the early 1600s to be used as swift-sailing privateers. They came to England's attention during the Anglo-Spanish War of 1625, when it was estimated that over 300 ships were captured by Flemish privateers. The term frigate applied to both small sloops and ships of 300 tons. We do know that they all shared a low profile and very light design, and that they were powered by both sail and oar. The Duke of Buckingham expressed that they were as fit for flight as for fight. But hey, I'm still going to get some armchair admiral or Wikipedia warrior in the comment section and telling me I'm wrong and throwing the Napoleonic era definition of a frigate at me, without knowing that, definitions changed meaning throughout the centuries. English frigates were first developed in the Civil War, when the parliamentarian faction needed fast ships to defend their commerce from royalist privateers. These frigates were heavily armed and lacked oars. Oar-powered frigates would see a revival with the Restoration. In 1661, England acquired the Moroccan city of Tangier, and Charles II ordered the construction of 3 galley frigates to protect his new colony. He needed ships that were both flexible and powerful to fight against the Barbary rovers. These ships had especially large crews to man the sweeps, most of the recruits being press-gang Thames watermen. What distinguished these ships from later galley frigates was their length. They were especially long. After Charles II was deposed, oars became a standard feature on Royal Navy frigates. Well, they were equipped for rowing, but had only half the number of oar ports, and were never given an enlarged crew. Due to all the conflicts in the 1690s, the Navy faced a manpower shortage. The frigates of the 1690s were built with a higher freeboard to make them more resilient in hard weather. They had better sailing qualities and better habitability, thanks to their more spacious and better ventilated lower decks. The decks were usually cramped and stinking. By the way, oars deployed on sail ships are called sweeps, and the ports which they stuck out of called oar ports or scuttles. Owing to their size and weight, the usage of sweeps rose and receded depending on the conflicts of the time. Owing to their speed and flexibility, galleys made good merchants for delivering certain goods, like messages or slaves. During wartime, they could escape privateers more easily, and were an especially common sight in the English Channel. But naval use of galleys kinda died in the early 1700s. Interest was renewed during Britain's involvement in the Great Northern War between 1715 and 1721 to protect its valuable trade of naval stores. The Russians and Swedes deployed specialist flotillas of oared craft, perfect for the archipelagos and shallow waters around the Baltic. The galley frigates built in this time could also be detached to the Caribbean, where they were great for stamping out piracy and smuggling. In 1695, Captain William Kidd was hired by a consortium of investors to hunt pirates and French shipping in the Indian Ocean. Kidd himself had a piratical background. He had sailed as a privateer and buccaneer, organized mutinies, and suffered them himself. He was now 41 years of age, an excellent sailor, but of an arrogant streak. Kidd's investors included powerful admirals and even the king himself, allowing him access to the mighty shipyards of London. For a pirate, this must have been a dream, and he was given £8,000 to construct a ship. Kidd even sold his old ship, the 16-gun sloop Antigua, to contribute £600 to the pot. Thanks to the influence of his supporters, the construction was moved to the top of the queue at Castle Shipyard in Deptford. He spent many tireless nights drawing up plans for the ship, and was closely involved in its construction. He had only commanded small and mid-sized vessels before, so this must have been very exciting. Owing to his experience, he knew exactly what kind of ship he needed: a galley frigate. The 1690s had seen a revolution in frigate design, resulting in a sleek hull that was 32 meters long and 8 meters wide. The new frigates were equipped for rowing, but weren't optimized for it. Kidd's ship was 8 meters wide, same as the contemporary frigate, but 38 meters long, making her superior at rowing. In design she is usually compared to the HMS Charles, painted here by the famous Willem van der Velde. The biggest difference lied in weight. The Adventure weighed almost half the tons burthen of the Charles, 287 compared to 548. In terms of rigging, she was very similar to the Charles. Most galleys in merchant and privateer service had a simple construction, with short masts rigged only with mainsails and topsails. The Adventure had a spritsail, that's a sail located in the bowsprit, the nose of the ship, and a mizzen-top gallant, that's a sail on the mizzenmast. Since the steering wheel had yet to be invented, the ship was turned by a whipstaff, a large pivoting pole connected to the tiller. Whipstaff was also a sailor's slang for the penis. I am uncertain about the Adventure's armament. Some sources say 32 or 34 guns, but an eyewitness said 28 or 30. Either way, these would have been light cannon, 3 to 6 pounders. A lot of them were most likely swivel guns. According to an eyewitness, the Adventure had 2 gun decks. The upper gun deck carried the bulk of her armament. The lower gun deck carried fewer cannons, but was pierced with a tier of oar ports for rowing in calm winds. The lids of the oar ports were open from forward with a horseshoe-shaped hinge, with a ring bolt on the inside for a rope to haul it shut. The sweeps were 6 meters long. When they weren't in use, they were racked on the carlings, beams running along the interior length of the ship. The crew would have rowed by standing upright, and the gun deck would have had to be sufficiently tall, so that the crewmen could stand upright and exert their full force into each thrust. But I don't know how many sweeps she carried. 3 men were needed on each, and we know she had a crew of 160 men. Of course, you didn't need to use all oars at the same time. In calm winds, only a skeleton crew would have been sufficient in the rigging, and the rest could have been delegated to the sweeps. But in a battle during moderate wind, some would have been needed on the sails, some on the sweeps, and a lot of boys on the cannons. Anyway, at most she would have had 40 oars, the same as the HMS Charles, and at least 20. Historians are uncertain if the ship was actually built from the ground up, or if she was an old merchant vessel refitted into a privateer. Edward Barlow described her as a pretty frigate-built ship. Frigate in the 17th century did not refer to the ship's purpose, it simply meant a ship that was built for speed. A frigate-built ship could have been a privateer, man-of-war, or merchant, and its purpose often changed during its lifespan. Refitting would certainly have been faster and cheaper. She was launched from Castle Shipyard on the 5th of December, 1695. She was collectively owned by Kidd and the investors, but if he could deliver goods worth more than £100,000, the galley would be granted as his private property, as, quote, gratification for his good service. And Kidd wanted nothing more. She was the perfect pirate ship, and pirate hunter. As Kidd later learned the hard way, the 5 fast weeks might have been a bit too fast. She does not appear to have been especially well built, and her seaworthiness would prove lacking during her quite short career. Galley ships would often see 40 or even 70 years of service, the Adventure less than 3. Historians believe that the workmen had done a sloppy work on caulking the double hull, inevitably resulting in leakage. It is likely that the greedy investors, whilst simultaneously eager in putting Kidd to sea, had cut costs where it was important. For example, he had to buy provisions on credit. His loans were only paid off when rumor of a French invasion threatened to stall his voyage for indefinitely. Kidd was boastful and arrogant about his ship. On his way down the Thames, he encountered the king's own luxury yacht, the Catherine. He refused to show her the proper respect. Luckily, the king himself wasn't aboard, and that would have been embarrassing. But the Catherine fired a warning shot, demanding that Kidd dipped his flag or furl his topsails. But the Adventure, having both wind and current, glid downriver. According to the Catherine's captain, the sailors in the Adventure's rigging then dropped their pants and clapped their backsides at him. As she made her 2 long crossings over the Atlantic, Kidd's crew weren't so cocky anymore. The flaws in her construction had become apparent as Kidd exhausted his crew from pumping out all the leaking seawater. As they finally landed on Madagascar, the carpenter tried patching her up, but warned Kidd that the Adventure would have to be overhauled. Soon. Kidd had her careened, the lower hull cleaned from barnacles and seaweed, marginally improving her seaworthiness. Next, the Adventure set sail for the Red Sea. We don't know if she intended to hunt the Muslim shipping, or the pirates doing the hunting. If the purpose was the latter, little did Kidd know that the East India Company were sending 3 heavy ships to do the same. Only one of these ships would arrive, an Indiaman of 36 guns, called Scepter. Having offloaded her cargo in Bombay, she had now been tasked with protecting Muslim ships in the Red Sea. Her captain had fallen ill, leaving her in command of the ship's mate, Edward Barlow. Barlow wrote a lengthy journal of his long life at sea, and provides us with a vivid watercolor of the Scepter. So too did he give an account of his encounter with the Adventure. As Barlow was relaxing in the port of Mocha, he heard through gossip that a pirate was hovering near the mouth of the Red Sea. Indeed, reputation had spread unjustly that Captain Kidd was a pirate, though he had acted arrogantly, refusing to show respect to fellow English ships and often pursuing them like a privateer before knowing their nationality. He hadn't actually committed any crimes yet. Since he wasn't affiliated with any of the trade companies, the Arabs refused him access to any of their towns. And the Adventure had been forced to sit and wait at the entrance of the Red Sea, her crew enduring an unbearable heat. Water was running low. Mutinous whispers were growing in the hold. Kidd sent a pinnace to Mocha, telling them to watch for ships, and learn the movements of the pilgrim ships. One day, the lookout signaled for Kidd that the ships were moving. The Adventure set sail. So was Kidd looking to attack the pilgrim ships? I don't actually know. This would have been an act of piracy, and Edward Barlow believed it to be so. He spotted the Adventure, flying no colours but a broad red pennant, without any cross on it. Barlow believed this to be the flag of no mercy, often used by pirates. But it could simply have been the red pennant obligated to be used by English privateers, or the red pennant used by Navy commodores to claim superiority over a squadron of ships. The wind was dying, and the sails of the ships slackened. Kidd ordered that the sweeps were pulled out. As Barlow closed in, he decided that this unidentified ship was a pirate, and ordered all hands to their stations. Well within range, he hoisted the king's colours and fired 3 guns. Owing to the lack of winds, he had a Scepter towed behind 2 longboats. Kidd did not fire back at Barlow. He found himself closest to a large Moorish ship, loaded with treasure and 700 passengers. The Moor was alerted by the Scepter's shooting, took aim at the Adventure, and fired. Her rigging sustained some damage, and Kidd returned fire, striking the Moor in the sail and hull. The slow chase was in motion. With barely any wind at all, Barlow's men in the longboats rowed desperately to lug their 400-ton behemoth into range. The Adventure did not once fire upon him. As the wind picked up, the Adventure hoisted her sails and sailed out from among the Moorish fleet. She did not want to stray too far from the fleet, but the Scepter kept driving her away. Finally, at sunset, Kidd hoisted full sail and escaped. This is one of the few instances of a galley ship being propelled by both sail and oar at the same time. Barlow returned to the Moorish fleet, who were grateful for his protection. Kidd had boarded a merchant ship, mostly crewed by Hindus and Portuguese. Though Kidd himself behaved civilly and sat drinking with the English captain, his crew had abused and stolen from the Portuguese monks found aboard. Kidd reprimanded his abusive crewmen, but the damage was already done. When the monks returned to Bombay, they alerted the Portuguese authorities. England and Portugal were considered ancient allies, on paper at least. In reality, they were opponents in trade and religion, and Portugal, a declining empire with a chip on their shoulder, wanted any reason to drop the English on their fingers. Now they had the authority to squash an English pirate, and sent out 2 heavily armed ships to deal with Kidd. Kidd was restocking on wood and water in the port of Caravar when he received news of the Portuguese threat. He ordered his crew to weigh anchor. Since this was a lengthy business, most captains would just have cut their cable, leaving the anchor behind to be retrieved at a later date. Kidd hoped to sail south, but the unpredictable winds of the season sent him off course. As night became day, the crew discovered the Portuguese ships almost within gunshot. The largest carried 44 cannon, the smaller 20. Due to the light winds, Kidd could have pulled out the sweeps and escaped, but chose instead to wait and allowed the Portuguese to get close. The Portuguese commander pulled out a speaking trumpet and asked where the ship was from. Kidd answered politely that he was from London. There ended the exchange. The chase continued. The wind picked up and the adventure was faster, but the Portuguese had sailed these waters for 2 centuries, and by daybreak, they were within range once more. Without warning, they fired 6 shots, scoring direct hits on the Adventure and wounding 4 men. Kidd returned fire, but seeing the large ship bearing down on him, he ran. As the chase kept on, the large ship fell behind, and the smaller closed the gap. Around noon, the Adventure suddenly tacked. She came about. If this dangerous move succeeded, she would come upwind and gain full control over the fight. The Portuguese captain was filled with dread. The move succeeded, and the Adventure opened fire. Now the winds died, so there was no fear of the larger ship relieving the smaller. The Adventure pulled out her sweeps, allowing her to constantly outmaneuver the Portuguese. At some point, they were even dismasted. After 7 hours, Kidd had lost 11 men, but the Portuguese ship was torn to shreds. Kidd's men wanted to plunder their defeated opponent, but as the wind picked up and the Commodore approached, Captain Kidd opted for an escape. Never a modest man, he would later comment, "I believe no Portuguese will ever attack the King's colors again, in that part of the world especially." The Adventure finally succeeded in her task and captured 2 French prizes. The first was the 150-ton Rouparel, which Kidd took as a consort and renamed November. The second and more famous was the Quedagh Merchant, a wealthy trader carrying goods worth twice as much as Kidd's initial investment. Whilst the merchants aboard carried French passes and thus qualified as a legal prize, part of the cargo was owned by a Mughal aristocrat, who would get Kidd into enough trouble to result in his eventual hanging. But by this point, the Adventure was in her worst state. Hard seas and multiple engagements had made her fall apart. The outer sheet of the double hull was infested with sea worms that glowed at night like little candles. Kidd ordered his men to wool her round with cables, that is, wrapping the ship with very thick ropes to literally hold her together, kinda like the flex tape of the 1600s. Making it back to Madagascar was a race against time, the hourglass being the Adventure's hold, slowly filling up with water. 7 Hindus, known as Lascars, were forced to do the bulk of the pumping. At Madagascar, Kidd hoped to finally capture some pirates and bring them in chains back to England. Instead, most of his crew mutineered over to the pirates, leaving him with less than half of his men. The new plan was to take the Quedagh and return to New York. He had the Adventure beached and stripped of all rigging and armaments. His crew patched together new sails for the Quedagh, consisting of old sails from the Adventure, and even expensive cloths they had plundered, like silk and striped calicos. When the Adventure had been stripped of anything of value, Kidd had her burned to ashes, so that the metalwork could be scavenged and sold. He was a frugal man, and needed every bit of money to pay back his investors. It's a shame how things turned out. The Adventure could have been the perfect pirate ship. Instead, shoddy craftsmanship and bad luck ended her voyage prematurely. Some treasure hunters have claimed to have found a wreck of the Adventure in our modern day, but this is debatable. One eyewitness claimed that Kidd had burned her, meaning nothing would have remained. Kidd himself said that he could not keep the galley from sinking, which some have interpreted as her, sinking. Corroborated by the other account, I think it more so meant that if he had tried bringing her along, she would have sunk. So by filling in the gaps, we can assume he burned her for that reason. Rest in peace, sweet princess. You did your best. Huge thanks to my generous channel members and Patreon supporters. In particular, Cole Freer, Max Dweck, 1660, Michaela Jans, Daniel Stryker, Seadog, Randall DeVere, Old Man Said, and Krillov. If you'd like to interact with me or fellow pirate history enjoyers, please check out the link to our Discord server in the video description. Hope to see you there. Cheers!